So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Mashiyach the prophet. We find then the layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiyach laid waste from many centuries. As we read then Mashiyach the prophet, let's then understand what the great prophet was explaining during his time, because the people of his time, obviously, they were mocking him and did not understand what the prophecies meant. And as usual, during the times and seasons and generations, people always mock the great prophecies of the Holy Creator, because he himself has spoken through his prophets and also the Shilishim that the people do destroy his own prophets for their own gains. But then the Creator himself has said that this day will come when then the autumn feast must be then completed. Prior of this time, then, let's read what the Mashiyach then himself has said, because he was the only true obedient person in this earth that was able then simply obey the entire instructions as far as we can understand the spring feast. So let's read then what the Mashiyach was explaining, so then we become ourselves acquainted with the times and the seasons, because the end of this age then is coming. Now the Mashiyach has given a few prerequisites as far as if we want to join the kingdom of heaven. Let's then understand what some of them are, because as the Mashiyach and also the Shilishim, they have said very plainly that evil resides in the flesh, and each person in this earth have evil in their flesh, with absolutely no exception. The only exception is when the evil makes itself present. Then what we say on behalf of the kingdom then truly counts. But let's then evaluate what the Mashiyach has said. He said that he was the vine, and then the Creator is the cultivator. Every branch that is in him that does not give fruit, he, the Creator, takes it away. And he that bears fruit, then explaining then the person bearing fruit, he, the Creator, prunes it, that it might produce more fruit. Then the Mashiyach said, you are already pruned because of the word that Mashiyach has spoken with his people. So let's understand what he meant by pruned, because we can understand that then the Mashiyach was explaining he was able to clean up the holy instructions from Takanot and Maasim. Then the Mashiyach was able to teach these people what then the Creator himself has taught Moses. Why? Because during the time of the Mashiyach and prior of, the people of the law, those people who were involved with the laws of Moses, they were extremely, but very extremely evil people, because they forgot to teach the holy instructions of Moses, and they included Takanot and Maasim in order to gain money. There were, however, those who were interested in helping the people. There were people that were interested in having the instructions at least taught the very minimum of it. But for the most part, the Mashiyach knew they were doing this in exchange for money. And the people then could not be obedient, because have in mind, back in those days, the people could not have a copy of the holy instructions for themselves. So then, as we read then what the Mashiyach has spoken as far as then the cultivator, or then the Creator himself, he prunes that it might produce more fruit. Then he said, you are already pruned because of what the Mashiyach has said. Then he continues on, the Mashiyach explains, then we should then abide in him, because as the branch is not able to produce fruit by itself, then those who are of the Mashiyach should abide in him. Now, as we explain these situations, there are many people who are then independent branches, and each of them, they can't produce fruit. The Mashiyach said, if we are not in line with the holy instructions and the basics of it, then we can't produce fruit. And let's continue on what the Mashiyach has said. Likewise, you are also not able then to produce fruit if not then linked with him. Then the Mashiyach goes further and explained, then if a person does not produce fruit, then this branch is obviously plucked and taken away and burned with fire. So what the Mashiyach then is explaining as far as the spiritual section of these instruction. The Mashiyach is explaining, he himself being the living Torah, he was the living instructions. He was the only person able to walk through what then the prophets have said regarding then the spring feast. So then, in many places of teachings of this world, they don't understand the importance of the spring feast in a spiritual sense. They understand the spring feast as the substance of the feasts themselves, but they can't understand, unfortunately, what it means in the spiritual way. And when the Mashiyach then was explaining the spiritual understanding, he himself was the only person able then to complete the spring feast, and he gave his life, so then those who were in the Mashiyach, then they can produce fruit based on what they say of him. Each individual person, what they say of him, what they show of him, is then fruit. If a person is a fat person of only listening and never saying of the Mashiyach, these people are not producing fruit. It's not only saying the word as far as reading the instructions, it is understanding the holy instructions and then explaining what the Mashiyach has said. That's the point. It's not only explaining the instructions, but from the light of what the Mashiyach has said. And we should remind ourselves, the Mashiyach then, he entered Jerusalem on a colt, as he was coming lowly. As some people say, this person coming into Jerusalem, then on a donkey, he is then the Savior of Israel, and many people did not understand. So then, when we understand the holy instructions, it's not going to fit what we want out of this life. And people always are searching for power and money and prestige and position, and the Mashiyach is not for this. As then we understand the Mashiyach coming into Jerusalem in a lowly coat, then we can understand the importance of checking ourselves, make sure we don't have the prideful desire of grandiosity as far as the world is concerned. So then the Mashiyach explains, if a person does not then, as a branch, bears fruit, then the Creator himself. What is then the Creator himself? The Creator himself is the times and the seasons he spoke with his prophets. The Creator himself has spoken with Moses and explained very plainly the spring feast, the autumn feasts. Then we understand year by year, generation by generation, many spring feasts, many autumn feasts. And then at the end, the word of the Creator is spoken by then Moses. Completes itself at the end of this age, and then those who are not of the Mashiyach are burned at the end. So then, as far as the Creator himself then burning them is because of what he has spoken through his prophets. So then, what can we understand as far as the Mashiyach? What has he said? The Mashiyach then explains a very important point. Because when the Mashiyach is truly leading, the situation becomes solely and exclusively for his own use. Now, people that don't want this kind of situation in their lives, if they have doubts, if they have inconveniences, if they are not in line with the world, and more so if they think this world then is going to be fixed. That's the worst situation ever. Because let's read what the Mashiyach has said. Because the Mashiyach was the only true authority as far as understanding the holy instructions. So then we search for it, because he was and is the example. And even the Shilishim said very plainly that they were very honored of being rejected by the world, because of the world was then obviously going to be destroyed, and because of the word the Mashiyach then spoke. But let's read then what the Mashiyach has said, so we can acquaint ourselves what then the Mashiyach has explained. Then he said very plainly, as far as the end of the world, and then the branches that are going to be burned. So then we must link these instructions as such. Then the Mashiyach is explaining of the time of the end. Then he explains also, as for flashes, lightning from heaven, and it is under heaven then obviously lit, such will to be the Son of Man in his day. But first it is required that then he goes through many trifles and be rejected by this generation. The Mashiyach is already explaining, because he himself being the truth, then the generation rejects him. And as it was in the days of Noah, Noah is explaining from the same line the Mashiyach is explaining he was rejected. Likewise it will be in the days of the Son of Man, for they were eating, they were drinking, and taking wives and giving them to husbands, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the Vesuvius came and destroyed them. So he himself, he was then obedient and was rejected, because this world is evil. So then he extends the understanding of himself and Noah. Also he was rejected. So it was then as Lot. Then what went on with Lot? And again, as it was in the days of Lot, that they were eating and they were drinking and they were buying, they were having trade and planting and they were building. Also Lot was rejected where he was at. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, then the Creator himself has rained down fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them. Thus it wilt be in a day that the Son of Man is revealed. So how then the world is going to end? With fire and brimstone, as the example was given then as far as the cities of the plain. As then we take a trip over there, if you go over there, you take a trip and you go into the area of the desert, it's very hot, you go there and you find yet the stones of brimstone. You light a match on it and then comes out a blue flame. So then the Mashiyach is explaining from Luke and also from Yohanan the direct layer related with the time of the end of this age. Now the Mashiyach is not obviously going to go along with those who are not in line with him. That's why then the Mashiyach was explaining that he was then giving them the instructions because he had already pruned them. The old junk that the people of the law were teaching was then taken away because the Mashiyach had cleaned them up. Now continue on with the Mashiyach. Let's try to understand. If we are outside of the Mashiyach and back on the law, we are then simply branches not producing fruit. Let's understand once more. If we are outside of the Mashiyach, if we are not in line with what the Mashiyach has said, then people are merely branches not producing fruit by themselves. So then, is the Torah important? Absolutely. Are the holy instructions important? Absolutely. The prophets, are they important? Absolutely. Should we exchange these for what the Mashiyach has said? No. If the people, though they have the entire knowledge of the world and they are not linked with the Mashiyach, then they are not producing fruit. As nice as they can be, as knowledgeable as they can be, they can't produce fruit. So the Mashiyach was very clear as far as what he was explaining. We should know the Torah, we should know the prophets, we should know the writings. But if the people are then not linked with the Mashiyach and linked with the holy instructions, because we are explaining only people who are then linked with the instructions. Those who despise the holy instructions, they are not even counted. So the Mashiyach is explaining, for the person then to produce fruit, must be linked with the holy instructions, obviously, and most important, being linked with him. Because the knowledge of the Torah only brings fruit when it is linked with the Mashiyach. This is what the Mashiyach then is explaining. Next time I'm going to evaluate more of these in the enlightenment of the Shilishim, such as Shaul, Shimon, Peter, Paul, and the other Shilishim, so then we can understand, as far as they were linked with the Mashiyach, they were producing fruit, and they were part of the holy instructions. Those who are not, then they are taken away at the end and burned with the rest. This is what the Mashiyach said, very plain and simple. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.